August 14, 2005. Two F-16 fighter jets scramble to intercept a passenger plane. The pilots pull alongside. What they see makes their blood run cold. The co-pilot is slumped over the controls. Oxygen masks dangle from the ceiling. Passengers sit motionless in their seats. Nobody is flying the plane, but the Boeing 737 keeps flying. On autopilot, climbing, turning, following its programmed route. With 121 people aboard, all of them dead or dying. For the next 2 hours and 43 minutes, this ghost plane will fly across Greek airspace. F-16 pilots will watch helplessly. Air traffic controllers will try desperately to make contact. Nobody will answer. Nobody can answer. This is Helios Airways Flight 522, the most disturbing aviation disaster you've never heard about. A plane that became a flying coffin at 34,000 feet. What caused this nightmare? The answer will shock you, because it wasn't terrorism. It wasn't mechanical failure. It wasn't pilot error in the way you'd think. It was something far worse. Something that could happen again tomorrow. The truth involves corporate negligence, a 12-euro part, and a catastrophic chain of failures that turned 121 people into ghosts before they even knew what was happening. Helios Airways was Cyprus's first budget airline. Founded in 1998, they operated cheap flights across Europe. Their business model? Cut costs everywhere possible. Maintenance, training, safety protocols. The airline had already racked up 16 safety violations. The Civil Aviation Authority had flagged them multiple times, but Helios kept flying. Flight 522 was supposed to be routine. Larnaca, Cyprus to Athens, Greece, then on to Prague. 115 passengers boarded that morning. 6 crew members, young families, business travelers, a couple heading to their wedding. The captain was Hans-Jürgen Martin, 58 years old, German national, over 16,900 flight hours of experience. The co-pilot was Pampos Karalambis, 51 years old, Cypriot national, 7,549 flight hours. Both experienced pilots, both about to die without understanding why. The Boeing 737-31S had a history. It had been experiencing pressurization problems. The previous night, a door seal issue was reported. Engineers ran a pressurization test. To do this test, they switched a small switch in the cockpit, from auto to manual. This switch controlled the pressurization system. In manual mode, the cabin wouldn't pressurize automatically. The engineers finished their test at 2 a.m. They signed off the paperwork. The plane was cleared for flight, but nobody switched that little knob back to auto. Nobody checked. Nobody noticed. That 12-euro switch was still in manual position. When Flight 522's engines started at 9:07 a.m., the cabin pressurization system didn't activate. The plane was already doomed, and nobody knew it yet. The passengers settled into their seats. The crew prepared for takeoff. Everything seemed normal. The plane lifted off at 9:07 a.m. local time, climbing toward cruising altitude. The pilots chatted with air traffic control. Standard procedures, routine communications. But something was already wrong. Very wrong. The plane was climbing toward 34,000 feet, but the cabin pressure wasn't increasing. At ground level, air pressure is normal. At 34,000 feet, there's not enough oxygen to survive. That's why planes pressurize their cabins. That's why that switch matters. In auto mode, the cabin would stay at the equivalent of 8,000 feet. Breathable, safe. In manual mode, the cabin pressure would match outside pressure. At 34,000 feet, you have about 30 seconds of useful consciousness. Then you pass out. Then you die. Flight 522 was climbing into a death trap. At 9:11 a.m., just 4 minutes after takeoff, the equipment cooling warning light activated. The pilots noticed. They discussed it, but they misunderstood what it meant. The cooling system warning actually indicated pressurization failure, but the pilots thought it was just an equipment issue. A minor problem, not life-threatening. This was their first critical mistake, but it wasn't really their fault. Helios had provided inadequate training. The warning systems were confusing. The pilots were set up to fail. At 9:20 a.m., The cabin altitude warning horn blared. This horn sounds identical to the takeoff configuration warning. The pilots heard it, but they thought it meant something else entirely. They thought they'd forgotten to configure something for takeoff. They didn't realize it was screaming. Your cabin altitude is too high. You're all about to pass out. At 9:30 a.m., the plane reached 28,900 feet. The oxygen in the cabin was getting dangerously thin. Passengers started feeling strange, lightheaded, confused. Some probably felt their hearts racing. Nobody panicked yet. Nobody understood. Hypoxia is insidious. It doesn't hurt. You don't gasp for air. You just get confused, euphoric even. Then you lose consciousness. At 9:33 a.m., Athens Air Traffic Control tried to contact Flight 522. No response. They tried again. Nothing. The pilots were likely already unconscious, slumped in their seats, still breathing, but not thinking, not flying. The plane's autopilot kept it climbing. At 9:37 a.m., the plane leveled off at 34,000 feet. Autopilot engaged, following its programmed route toward Athens. Inside the cabin, a nightmare was unfolding. 121 people were losing consciousness. Some passengers might have grabbed the oxygen masks. The masks dropped automatically when cabin pressure failed. But those masks only provide 12 minutes of oxygen. They're designed for emergency descents, not for flying at altitude for hours. 12 minutes of oxygen, then nothing. Parents desperately trying to put masks on their children. People gasping, confusion turning to terror. Then nothing. Silence. But one person stayed conscious longer than the others. Andreas Prodromou, a 25-year-old flight attendant. He had flight training. He was working toward his pilot's license. And he was sitting near a portable oxygen supply, the kind flight attendants use. With more oxygen available, he stayed conscious, while everyone around him died. Can you imagine? Walking through that cabin. 121 people unconscious or dead. Oxygen masks dangling. The cockpit silent. Both pilots slumped. And the plane just keeps flying. Prodromou made his way to the cockpit. We know this because the F-16 pilots saw him later. He was trying to save the plane, trying to save everyone. But he wasn't a commercial pilot. He didn't have the training. He didn't know how to operate the autopilot systems. And his portable oxygen was running out. At 10 a.m., Greek Air Traffic Control declared an emergency. They'd lost all contact with Flight 522. The plane was approaching Athens airspace. It wasn't responding to any calls. 2 F-16 fighter jets scrambled from Tanagra Air Base. Their mission? Intercept the rogue aircraft. Find out what's happening. At 11:24 a.m., the F-16s pulled alongside Flight 522. What they saw was unbelievable. The fighter pilots looked into the cockpit windows. The captain was motionless, slumped in his seat. The co-pilot was also unconscious, collapsed over the controls. Oxygen masks hung from the ceiling throughout the cabin. Through the cabin windows, passengers sat completely still, not moving, not waving, not panicking, just sitting, like mannequins. The F-16 pilots radioed back to command. They described what they were seeing. Nobody could believe it. A ghost plane, flying itself. Everyone aboard appeared dead or unconscious. The fighter jets escorted Flight 522, following it through Greek airspace, watching helplessly. They couldn't shoot it down over populated areas. They couldn't save anyone aboard. They could only watch and wait. At 11:49 a.m., something changed. The F-16 pilots saw movement in the cockpit. Someone was there. It was Andreas Prodromou, the flight attendant, still conscious, still fighting. The F-16 pilots tried to signal him. They waved. They tried hand signals. Prodromou waved back. He looked desperate, panicked. He was trying to control the plane. But here's what nobody knew at the time. Prodromou was already dying. His portable oxygen was almost gone. He'd been breathing supplemental oxygen for over 2 hours. His body was shutting down. His brain was oxygen deprived. He was making mistakes, fumbling with controls he didn't fully understand. The F-16 pilots watched him struggle. They radioed instructions to Athens. Maybe ground control could talk him through landing the plane. Maybe he could save it. But there was no radio contact. Prodromou either couldn't figure out the radio, or he was too oxygen-deprived to communicate, or the radios weren't working. We'll never know. At 11:50 a.m., the left engine flamed out. It ran out of fuel. The plane had been flying for 2 hours and 43 minutes. The fuel tanks were nearly empty. Now it was flying on one engine, losing altitude. At 11:54 a.m., the right engine died. Both engines gone. No fuel left. The plane became a 50-ton glider, falling from the sky. The autopilot disconnected. The plane started descending, fast. Prodromou had moments to save it, but he couldn't. He didn't have the training. He didn't have the oxygen. He didn't have time. The F-16 pilots watched in horror. They saw the Boeing 737 bank left, descending rapidly. There was nothing they could do. At 12:03 p.m., Flight 522 crashed into a hill near Gramatiko, Greece, 40 kilometers north of Athens. The impact was catastrophic. The plane exploded on contact. Debris scattered across the hillside. Fires erupted. All 121 people aboard were killed. 115 passengers, 6 crew members. But here's the thing that makes this even worse. The thing that the investigation revealed. Most of them were already dead before the crash. Autopsies showed that the majority of passengers had died from hypoxia. They'd suffocated at altitude. They never knew the plane crashed. They were already gone. Parents, children, a couple heading to their wedding, dead in their seats, while the plane flew itself across the Mediterranean. What makes this absolutely devastating is what investigators found next. The cockpit voice recorder captured everything. In the final moments before the pilots lost consciousness, they were confused. They heard the warning horn. They discussed what it might mean. The captain said the warning was the takeoff configuration. They never understood it was the cabin altitude alarm. They never realized they were suffocating. The last words on the recorder are routine, casual, then silence, just the sound of the warning horn. For 2 hours and 43 minutes, that horn blared into an empty cockpit, warning dead men, while the plane flew on. The investigation uncovered a catastrophic chain of failures. But it started with that 12-euro switch, the pressurization mode selector, left in manual instead of auto. The engineers who did the pressure test never switched it back. Their checklist didn't require it. Helios's maintenance procedures were inadequate, but the failures went deeper, much deeper. The pilots never caught the error during their pre-flight checks. Why? Because Helios's checklist didn't include verifying the pressurization switch. It should have. Every airline checklist should include it. But Helios cut corners. The training was insufficient. The pilots confused the cabin altitude warning for the takeoff configuration warning. These are different sounds on different aircraft, but on the 737, they're identical. Boeing knew this was confusing. Airlines had reported it, but Boeing hadn't changed it. The equipment cooling warning activated first. This was actually the pressurization failing, but the pilots didn't recognize it. Helios hadn't trained them properly on this warning. And here's the most damning detail. The plane had experienced pressurization problems before, multiple times. Engineers had logged complaints. Passengers had reported issues. Helios knew, but they didn't ground the aircraft. They didn't fix the underlying problems. They applied band-aid solutions. They kept it flying. Because grounding a plane costs money. Inspections cost money. Real fixes cost money. Helios chose profit over safety. 121 people paid the price. The Greek investigation blamed the airline. They blamed the maintenance crew. They blamed the pilots. But they also blamed Boeing. For the confusing warning system. For inadequate training materials. For design flaws that contributed to the disaster. Criminal charges were filed against 4 Helios executives, including the CEO. Charges of manslaughter through negligence. The airline's director of operations. The chief pilot. The maintenance manager. All faced trial. The maintenance engineers who left the switch in manual. They were charged too. The trials dragged on for years. Some were convicted. Some were acquitted. The CEO received a 10-year prison sentence, reduced to 3 years on appeal. 3 years for 121 deaths. The airline collapsed. Helios Airways ceased operations in 2006, just 1 year after the crash. Their reputation destroyed, their finances ruined, but the damage was done. 121 people were dead, families destroyed, children orphaned, and the truth was simple. This was preventable, completely, entirely, preventable. A 12-euro switch, a checklist item, 5 minutes of proper training. Any of these could have saved everyone. Instead, corporate negligence, cost-cutting, inadequate oversight, they created a perfect storm of failure, and 121 people suffocated at 34,000 feet, while their plane flew them toward death. The crash changed aviation regulations worldwide. The FAA and EASA issued new directives. Airlines had to improve pressurization training. Checklists had to include the pressurization mode selector. Boeing modified the warning systems. They made the cabin altitude warning distinct from other alarms. On newer 737 models, the warnings sound different. Pilots can't confuse them anymore. Budget airlines faced new scrutiny. Regulators increased inspections. Maintenance standards were tightened. The era of unregulated low-cost carriers was over. But for the families, none of this mattered. 121 people were gone. The lawsuits took years to settle. Boeing paid undisclosed amounts. Helios paid settlements. The Greek government paid compensation. But money doesn't bring back a child. It doesn't bring back a spouse. Andreas Prodromou became a tragic hero. The flight attendant who stayed conscious, who tried to save everyone, who waved to the F-16 pilots in his final moments. His family received recognition, but they'd rather have him back. The crash site near Grammatico became a memorial. 121 trees were planted, one for each victim. Families visit. They leave flowers. They remember the day a ghost plane fell from the sky. The F-16 pilots who witnessed it needed counseling. They watched 121 people die. They couldn't do anything. One of them later said it haunted him, watching that plane spiral down.